Thousands of years ago, people recognized differences in plants and animals. They identified some plants as poisonous while others were safe to eat. Some animals were identified as dangerous and should be avoided, while others were identified as harmless. This idea of arranging organisms based on characteristics is now known as classification. Grocery stores classify and arrange similar products together. In this program, you will learn how living organisms are also organized like products on grocery store shelves. The science of classifying and naming organisms is known as taxonomy. An early classification system was developed by the Greek philosopher Aristotle. He classified organisms as types of plants or animals. Plants were grouped based on their size and structure, as herbs, shrubs, or trees. Animals, on the other hand, were classified based on where they live, on land, in water, or in the sky. Aristotle's system of classifying worked for many organisms. However, it had some problems. For example, a butterfly spends part of its life on land and part of its life in the sky. It would be hard to classify under this system. Despite problems, Aristotle's classification scheme remained the primary way to classify organisms for over 2,000 years. In the 1800s, a Swedish scientist named Carolus Linnaeus made two very important contributions to the science of taxonomy. He created two systems that led to him eventually being known as the father of taxonomy. Linnaeus figured out a logical way to group organisms together. It is called hierarchical classification. He also figured out a standard way to name organisms. It is called binomial nomenclature. Linnaeus's hierarchical classification arranges organisms from high levels to lower levels. The kingdom level of classification is the largest grouping of organisms. Organisms in the same kingdom share general characteristics. Like Aristotle, Linnaeus recognized that many organisms could be arranged into two major groups, plants and animals. He classified and named the two groups Kingdom Plantae and Kingdom Animalia. Linnaeus also developed the smallest, most specific grouping of organisms, known as species. The species level of organization refers to organisms that share very similar characteristics. From this classification scheme, Linnaeus developed a system for naming organisms. Linnaeus's system of naming organisms helped prevent confusion over the many common names that a single organism might have. Take a frog, for example. For each language, there is a different name for frog. Swedish, groda; Italian, rana; Russian, zaba; African, pada. Confusion also results from the meaning of different common names. For example, a silverfish isn't a fish at all. It's a type of insect. A seahorse is not a horse. It is a type of fish. All of this confusion can be eliminated with the use of Linnaeus's two-word naming system. This system is known as binomial nomenclature. Binomial nomenclature gives each organism a two-part scientific name. Scientific names are usually in Latin. Latin is often used in science because it isn't easily confused with other languages. The first word of the two-part name for a particular species is the genus. A genus is a group of species that has similar characteristics. In binomial nomenclature, the genus name is always capitalized. The second word of the two-part name usually describes a unique characteristic of an organism. This word is called the specific epithet, and it is always lowercase. The two together form the species or scientific name for a particular organism. This name is always italicized. No two scientific names are the same. This prevents confusion between species. To see an example of a species name written in binomial nomenclature, click on the bird. The common name of this bird is the American robin. The scientific name is Turdus migratorius. Now it's your turn to show that you know how species are named. Please label both parts of the scientific name by dragging the labels to their correct location. The invention of the microscope allowed scientists to observe organisms in greater detail than they could in Linnaeus's time. Click on the microscope to see the differences in the two organisms on the rock. Without the use of a microscope, many people would not be able to tell these organisms apart. The microscope and new scientific discoveries revealed the need for more levels in Linnaeus's hierarchical classification system. Today, there are 7 different levels. They range from the broadest, kingdom, to the most specific, species. Organisms of similar species are grouped into a genus. Several similar genera, which means more than one genus, are grouped to form families. Families combine to form what are called orders. Groups of organisms in similar orders are then grouped into classes. Classes are grouped differently for plants and animals. In animals, classes are grouped to form phyla. Classes of plants, however, are grouped into divisions. Phyla or divisions are then grouped together to form the largest, most general grouping, the kingdom. There is an easy way to remember the order from kingdom down to species. Remember this statement: King Philip came over for good soup. Each word in this sentence starts with the first letter of each level in the hierarchical classification scheme. If this isn't easy to remember, you can try to make up your own sentence to help you remember it too. Taxonomists are people who study taxonomy. When they attempt to classify and name organisms, it helps them to know how organisms are related. Presently, they can compare preserved fossils as well as the DNA of different organisms. Sometimes this shows how organisms are related or how they've changed over time. When the changes are known, they can be shown on branching diagrams. These diagrams can show how organisms are related to one another. They can also show at which point new characteristics developed. Click on each branching diagram to learn about them. This type of branching diagram shows the relationship between a wolf and a house cat. They both can be traced back to an organism that ate meat because they share this characteristic. The branch in the diagram shows that wolves and cats changed in different ways. As you see, the wolf developed from a more dog-like animal. The house cat developed from a more cat-like animal. Also, notice that the diagram shows that a cat shares more similar characteristics with a lion than a wolf. This type of branching diagram shows how members of a kingdom can be arranged according to the hierarchical classification system. Each color separation represents a new level in the classification scheme from the kingdom level to the species level. The trunk of the tree represents the entire kingdom. Each main branch from the kingdom is a phylum. Moving from the main branches towards the end represent the levels from class to species that follow in the hierarchical classification scheme. This diagram shows that all of the organisms on your screen belong to the kingdom Animalia. It also shows that each organism represents an individual species. Earlier in this lesson, you learned that the invention of the microscope changed the number of levels in Linnaeus's classification scheme. The microscope also helped scientists make observations that not all organisms fit into just 2 kingdoms as Linnaeus believed. Today, most people feel there are 5 or 6 kingdoms. Some taxonomists classify organisms into 5 kingdoms. Others classify them into 6 kingdoms. Click on each highlighted kingdom for general characteristics of organisms in each of the 5 and 6 kingdom schemes. You will learn more details about these kingdoms in future studies. When you are finished, you can revisit any kingdom or click Continue. The kingdom Monera contains only bacteria. Bacteria are single-celled and lack a nucleus. Therefore, they are prokaryotes. In the 6 kingdom classification scheme, bacteria are broken into 2 different kingdoms, Archaebacteria and Eubacteria, because they differ in internal components and where they live. Organisms in the kingdom Protista are known as protists. They are eukaryotes since their cells contain DNA in a nucleus. Many of these diverse organisms are single-celled, though some are multicellular. Some photosynthesize and some take in food. One thing they have in common is they all lack organ systems. Organisms in the kingdom Fungi are all eukaryotes. They are mainly multicellular. However, some are single-celled. Like protists, fungi lack organ systems. They do not photosynthesize. They absorb the food they need. All organisms in the kingdom Plantae are multicellular eukaryotes. Many plants have organ systems. They tend to spend their lives in one place because they don't move. All plants get their energy through photosynthesis. All organisms in the kingdom Animalia are multicellular eukaryotes. Many animals have complex organ systems. They can move at some stage in their life. All animals need to eat or absorb food to survive. You now know how and why organisms are classified. Now you will see how scientists find out if 2 organisms are the same or different. Many scientists use what is known as a dichotomous key for identifying organisms. You can use dichotomous keys to identify trees, insects, birds, wildflowers, or anything else that has been classified. A dichotomous key is a series of choices that show differences between organisms. In Latin, the word dichotomous means divided into 2 parts. This describes the 2 choices at each step in the key. At each step, you choose the best description of an organism's characteristics. If done correctly, a dichotomous key will lead you to the identity of an organism. To see an example of how to use a dichotomous key, please click on the seaweed. This activity will lead you to the kingdom that includes seaweed. Characteristics that apply to seaweed will highlight at each step in the key. Simply click once on the characteristic as it is highlighted. Cells contain their DNA in a nucleus. The organism is able to make its own food through photosynthesis. The organism does not have a waxy covering, called a cuticle, on its leaves and stems. Good job! Seaweed is in the kingdom Protista. The dichotomous key led to the kingdom Protista. You might wonder why you can get to the kingdom Protista in 2 ways. If you recall, this kingdom includes a diverse group of organisms. The key shows different ways to get to this kingdom based on different characteristics of various types of protists. In future studies, you will learn that seaweed is a plant-like protist. You could also use another key specific to the kingdom Protista to determine which phylum includes seaweed. You have now learned the history of classification. You know how to name organisms using binomial nomenclature. You should also be familiar with how to identify organisms using a key. You might recall that products are arranged in the grocery store by grouping similar food types together. However, stores could also have arranged the products by color, fat content, or by overall shape. Like grocery store products, living organisms can also be arranged in a variety of ways. The hierarchical system classifies organisms based on the characteristics they share with one another. This system has changed over many years. Science is a never-ending process. Who knows, maybe you will find a new way to classify the world's diverse organisms.